Welcome to This Might Help, where psychology research meets real life. I'm Dr. Lauren Rossetti. I'm an Australian psychologist and a researcher, and today I am bringing you another solo episode, which is all about courage. Not about courage and being brave in the sense of skydiving or quitting your job or moving to another country, though you could definitely apply this episode to those things as well. But today I really want to talk about all of the small ways that courage and bravery show up for us in our lives every day and how harnessing courage can really improve our lives. I've been thinking about the things that I've been putting off. If you'll remember the well-being win I was talking about last time, this kind of comes back to that. It could be a conversation that was really hard to have or a task that I was scared to do because I didn't want to do a bad job at it. Kind of all those small things that come up for a lot of us every day or every week. But when I go to do them, I feel that nervousness or I feel kind of an uncomfortable feeling and will often decide, okay, I'll get to it later. That got me thinking about how much our lives can be shaped every day by the things that we avoid doing because they scare us a little or because they make us nervous. This is the place where courage and where the psychology around how we can be brave can really make a difference and is what I want to unpack for us today. We're going to talk about what courage actually is from a psychology lens, why being brave matters for our well-being, and some of the practical evidence-based ways that we can build more courage even when we might feel like we're not really ready. What is courage from the perspective of psychology? Because I think courage gets a bit misunderstood. We tend to picture big, dramatic, heroic moments, but honestly, a lot of the bravest things that we do are really small and they're quiet and they might look like nothing from the outside. They could be the daily things that take courage, which are a hard conversation or putting your hand up for something or sending that message that you keep drafting and deleting or going on another date, even though you don't know how it's going to turn out. And when we think about courage, we tend to assume that brave or courageous people are the ones who don't feel afraid or that courage is fearlessness. But courage doesn't exist in the absence of fear. It often exists in the presence of fear. One of the definitions that I come back to is by the American Psychological Association Dictionary, which defines courage as the ability to meet a difficult challenge despite the physical, psychological, or moral risks involved in doing so. So this is even though there are risks, we can take on the challenge. Psychologist and researcher Stanley Rachman did a lot of work on fear and courage that we tend to draw on in psychology, and he also separated out three different things that we tend to confuse, which are fear, fearlessness, and courage. So first there's fear. That's our body's alarm kind of response telling us that there's a threat. Then there's fearlessness, which is when we're actually not feeling the fear in the first place, which is pretty rare. And finally, there is courage, which, like we just defined, is feeling the fear and choosing to act anyway. So courage is when we might feel that physical wave of fear, a pounding heart, a dry mouth. We might have shaking hands, and we still take the step to do the thing anyway. Stanley Rachman talks about this in his work and about courageous acts rather than courageous people, which I think is a really helpful distinction. So this helps us think about courage not as a personality that you either have or you don't have, but really as something you do every day. So we might see ourselves as a scared person or as an anxious person, but despite those things, we can still take courageous action. I might be scared of sending that text or of having the meeting or of even posting this episode, but the thing that can help me move forward is taking the courageous act anyway, even if I held the belief that I wasn't a courageous person. And this is where we might think, well, what even counts as courage? Or how do I know if what I am doing is an act of courage? And there's a few things that can tell us this. The thing we are doing is a choice. So you're choosing to take the action. That's one of the first things. There also needs to be something at stake. So that could be, I'm going to do this thing and the person may not respond in the way I want. I might lose something. It might not be the outcome I'm looking for. And then the last thing is that feeling of fear. So when you go to do the thing, I feel that feeling, but I'm going to take the step anyway. The way courage is researched and spoken about in psychology also shows us that it can look a bit different in different scenarios, or that it can be thought about in different categories. There's the courage our brains might picture first when we hear that word, which is physical courage. That is something that puts your body at risk. So it might look like a person running into a burning building or skydiving or some big physical act of bravery. There's also then moral courage, and that's when we're standing up for our morals and what we believe is right in the face of a social cost. And that could be something like telling the truth, it could be going against a group, it could be speaking up in a meeting when you know that something doesn't feel right. And then there is psychological courage. This is when we face internal discomfort. And by internal discomfort, I mean feelings of uncertainty or feelings of vulnerability. Those are hard emotions to face. And this psychological courage is that courage or bravery that we're commonly facing more in the day-to-day life. And it's coming up in often honest conversations. So that could be in those honest conversations that we're having with others around us. So, with loved ones, with friends, with people at work. But it also can be in the honest conversations that we're having with ourselves. So it might look like having a conversation with yourself about your patterns or about the things that we're avoiding, and then taking the courageous act of changing those things despite our fear. Or it might be the honest conversation with someone you're dating about what you actually want from the relationship and taking that courageous act to share that with them. We can also think of courage in general and personal terms, which is another really important thing to think about, because we might downplay our own acts of courage if we only think about courage at a general level. So what I mean by this is that there is general courage, and that can be things that we say are brave for everyone. So skydiving or saving someone in an accident or any of those things you can think about that feel like big courageous acts. Then there is personal courage, which is what is brave for you. Given your particular life and your particular fears, what is a courageous act for you? It might look like nothing that anyone else can see on the outside, but be a really important step for you. And these small private things we do each day that might make us feel afraid and we act anyway, this is often where we start to see that growth. Which brings us to the point of why does any of this matter so much? And it matters because on the opposite side of courage is often avoidance. And avoidance is sneaky because in the short term it works. When we avoid something that scares us, our anxiety drops in the moment, and that relief feels great. But the problem that comes up is that this teaches our brains the pattern that avoiding things was the right thing to do, which can keep anxiety going in the long term. Because every time we avoid, the fear gets a little bigger and the avoidance compounds over time. But the flip side of this is that courage can also compound. So every time we act despite the fear or we do something small that was courageous, the brain is also learning that this was okay and that the next time it gets a little bit easier. It doesn't mean that the fear is going to go away completely, and that's not the aim that we're looking for. We all know an example of when we might have had to give a presentation, or we might go on a first date, and the first time it feels really daunting or we're feeling so afraid. But the more and more we do these things, or the more times we take that small extra step, the more comfortable we feel, because our brain is getting more comfortable with that courage. Now we're hopefully all on the same page of knowing that courage is good for us in the long term, and that increasing our everyday courage in small ways helps us to grow. But then how do we build more of it? How do we actually build more everyday courage? The very good news is that because courage is something you do rather than something you are, it means that we can train it like a skill. So you build it in the way that you would build anything, which is by practicing. And there's a few ways that we can help ourselves to do this. The first strategy is to stop waiting to feel ready. The fear that comes up when we want to do something is often not a stop sign. Like we often hear people say, you're never going to feel completely ready or completely confident to do something, and you don't need to be. We can expect the fear, then move forward anyway. Might be remembering as well that confidence is the result of acting. So we become more confident and we build courage through repeated actions. It's like we were talking about last episode about motivation. Most of the time, motivation doesn't just happen spontaneously. Motivation often follows action. So you do the first step and then you feel more motivated to keep going. We can think about courage in a similar way. We take one small courageous step, we send that text or we send that email, and then we begin to build the courage to do those things again and again. The second strategy is to anchor it to what you value. Courage gets so much easier when the goal is actually worth it, and we're far more likely to approach something scary when the meaning is going to outweigh the risk. So instead of just thinking, I have to be brave and do this, try asking, what do I actually care about on the other side of this action? What is the thing I am working towards? Why will taking this action move me towards it? The next strategy is to start ridiculously small. You don't necessarily build courage by going straight for the most terrifying thing. It's the small steps every day that build it, and the small, brave things make the bigger things possible. Let's say you really hate your job, or you've always wanted to pack up and move overseas. The first step for most of us isn't just being able to do those things straight away. It's not saying, okay, be brave and just quit your job tomorrow. It's more likely the small acts instead that build you on your way there. It might be talking to a friend in your field about your job and letting them know that you're interested in new work, or it might be sending an email to someone you know or a mentor asking them if they have any leads. It could be as small as just starting to Google how it could logistically work to move somewhere. It can be as small as you need, but these small things often build that big momentum into those big, courageous goals that feel really scary right now. The next strategy is to separate the act from the outcome. Like I keep coming back to, courage is in the doing, not in whether doing it goes perfectly. And you can be brave and still get a no, and the bravery still counts. You might take the step and send an email to your boss asking them for a raise. You might have the courage to apply and go for a new job. And you might not be successful, or the outcome might not be what you wanted. But by doing those things, you've shown yourself that you can do hard things. You've shown yourself that it's going to be easier the next time you do it. You've also shown yourself that you're acting in a way that lines up with your values and moves you forward. So it's thinking not about judging yourself on whether the outcome was successful or whether it was exactly the outcome that you wanted, but it's judging yourself on the fact that you showed up and you took the step. And the final strategy that links with this is pairing your courage with self compassion, because being brave doesn't mean being harsh with yourself all the time. We are much more willing to take a risk when we know we won't tear ourselves apart if it doesn't work out. So, where I want to finish up at today is with the reminder that courage isn't this fixed trait that some lucky people have and the rest of us don't. It's every day, it's very personal, and most of the brave things you'll ever do will look small from the outside, or they won't even be noticeable from the outside at all. But the life we really want to live, or the life that we often envision for ourselves, it's usually sitting on the other side of something that does scare us a little. So maybe this week it's picking one small thing you've been avoiding or that scares you and just dedicating 5 minutes to making a start. Well, thank you for listening. And as always, if you need any extra support, there are helplines in the show notes. There are also the resources and the references in there from this episode. You can follow along for more on socials at This Might Help Podcast. And I'll catch you next time. Bye.
The information in this podcast is for general, informational, and educational purposes only. Whilst we love unpacking psychology research and evidence-based insights to support well-being, this podcast is not a substitute for personal mental health care or therapy with a qualified practitioner. Nothing we say should be taken as individualized advice. If anything you hear brings up concerns for you, we strongly encourage you to speak with your GP, psychologist, or another qualified health professional. You deserve support that's tailored to you. This podcast was recorded on Wurundjeri land. We acknowledge and pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of this country. We honour their knowledge and resilience and the ongoing impacts of colonisation on well-being.